They slaughtered
A
20.
Blade Runner's job is to hunt down replicants, manufacture humans you can't tell from the real thing.
What's this? Roy Batty. Probably the leader.
There was just one outfit making replicants that superhuman. The Tyrell Corporation.
Mr. Deckard, Dr. Eldon Tyrell.
I don't get it, Tyrell.
Commerce is our goal here at Tyrell. More human than human is our motto.
Hey guys, I'm Kevin.
I'm Jake.
And this is Movie Matters. Today we're talking about Blade Runner from 1982. We're kind of laughing because we just watched the trailer. The trailer,
easily the worst trailer we've ever watched.
Yeah, it was so bad. It did not market that movie well.
No.
Yeah,
not at all.
Very interesting. Before we get into it, I do want to thank our listeners and our viewers for 1,000 downloads across the platforms.
Mm-hmm.
We really appreciate all you guys for listening and liking our content. We also had another listener recommend us a movie. I'll shout him out. Jeff Young, appreciate you for sliding into our DMs and recommending a movie. We will get to it. I promise you on that. You have my word. So again, just want to shout out everyone and say thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, pretty awesome. Really cool that we hit that milestone. I mean, I'm not doing this for the viewers or for the I'm not doing it for the to get famous or anything like that. I'm doing it for fun, and but we do appreciate it. This movie is controversial, in my opinion. First off, I like this movie a lot. I saw this movie when I was young, when I was in my teens. My cousin showed me a ton of movies when I was 14, 15, a bunch of 80s movies, and this was one of them. And him and I watched it together, and I really liked it. I thought it was going to be an action movie with Harrison Ford's name attached, Ridley Scott. I expected it to be action-packed. It is not that type of movie at all.
No, yeah. Very, very much a film noir.
Yes.
Set in a dystopian future.
Yes.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah, it's a cool movie. So this movie made no money at the box office when it first came out. It kind of was too dark for audiences in '82 and definitely misunderstood. It went over budget a whole bunch of times. The production was pretty crazy. There's a really great documentary about the making of the movie that's out there called Dangerous Days, which was apparently the original working title for the movie, which is a pretty cool title, which is interesting because it's Dangerous Days when this movie is all at night.
Yeah, yeah.
Pretty interesting. And yeah, this movie made no money because it opened the same time as E.T.
Oh.
And E.T. made a ton of money. The Thing from John Carpenter actually is very similar, and it suffered the same fate. It didn't make any money because of E.T. in '82. Mm-hmm. There were praise for the visual style of this movie and the word of mouth of the slow pace and the bleak themes definitely caused a decrease in viewership and attendance to the movie in theaters. But they've definitely been re-examined, this and The Thing, but specifically this movie has been re-examined and praised for how ahead of its time it is. Yeah, tell me your thoughts, Jake. I know you love this movie.
What's interesting, I do love this movie. And what's interesting is this movie's not all that different from a lot of the gritty crime movies of the 70s, in terms of its tone. And obviously it's a sci-fi futuristic movie, but film noir is nothing new. The gritty urban kind of setting is not anything new, but yeah, it's very surprising how or what's the word I'm looking for? Like underappreciated it was at its time.
Yeah.
And like there's like, even watching it now, like the visual effects are like unreal. Especially knowing that it's from 82. And like the soundtrack is incredible.
Yeah, Vangelis.
The physical modeling that they do of like the Tyrell Corporation building is like astounding. Like there's a lot about this movie that's like crazy to think about how well done it was, for how little like attention it got. So yeah, I mean it's kind of insane, especially because Ridley Scott's coming right off of Alien. You know, like what, two years after Alien, basically.
79, yeah.
Like, I mean, it's kind of nuts that he didn't get the kind of attention that for a follow-up film to, you know, one of the greatest sci-fi horror movies, if not the greatest sci-fi horror movie of all time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's insane to think how much this movie has going for it, to be relegated to a cult status.
I know. And I think, and I hope, the sequel becomes that too, because the sequel is incredible.
Yeah,
and
it's
that
phenomenal.
movie made such little money at the box office. It's like astounding that movie didn't make the money that it should have. That movie should have been like a box office monster, and it made like no money. So I hope it follows in its footsteps, because that movie's great. And speaking of that movie, so the opening of Blade Runner 2049 with Detective K, who's played by Ryan Gosling, he goes to that like farm and goes to retire Dave Bautista's character, who's like a replicant. That whole scene was the original opening to this movie, which I saw in the documentary and read about. And I was just like blown away because I had no idea. And that's so cool that Denis, the director of Blade Runner 2049, did that for that. But also the same writer, Hampton Fancher, wrote obviously Blade Runner and 2049. So, I was blown away by that because that's so cool, and that opening scene is awesome. This movie's kind of famous because it's the first movie ever to receive a director's cut. Isn't that weird? I
didn't know that. I know this movie's notorious because of the number of cuts.
Yeah. Yeah, so it says, well, I don't know if it was the first one, but it says this was one of the first major motion movies to be reissued later in a director's cut, in which the director was allowed to restore edited footage or otherwise make changes more closely reflecting his vision. Yeah. Today, such later revisions of movies is more commonplace with director's cuts and stuff like that. The first director's version of this movie came out in 1992, and it's pretty interesting. It came out on the anniversary of its 10th anniversary, and the first that recut deemed the director's cut wasn't even a director's cut, from what I saw and read. The producers basically changed it over a little bit because the theatrical cut has like voiceover and a completely different ending from the final cut, which we mentioned in our last podcast. We did watch the final cut, so Ridley's director's cut from 2007, his final cut. Mm-hmm. That's the one we both watched. We watched it on 4K. Yep. Looks awesome. Pretty interesting that that's the version he prefers for this movie, and he believes it's his most complete film he's ever made, and it's one of his personal favorites, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I also did read that the final cut is the only version of the movie that Ridley Scott had total creative control over, besides the original theatrical release.
Well, the theatrical release, there's some contention with like the narration. Like Ridley didn't really want it, and they put it in because people thought the plot was too confusing, and they needed the narration to basically tell people what was going on. And like, there's also like there's kind of a rumor that Harrison Ford botched the voiceover narration and deliberately kind of sabotaged it because he's thought it was stupid, which he does deny apparently.
But also seems pretty on point for Harrison Ford.
Yeah. He also had a tough time working on this movie. He definitely, this is from what I read, it was one of his like worst experiences on a movie. He was used to working with like Francis Ford Coppola and Spielberg, and those are like actors, directors, where they tell you what to do. They want creative input on the character. And Ridley, being basically a commercial director, literally directing commercials, he was more of, I want to direct the camera, and I want to direct the set. And Harrison Ford, he is an awesome actor. I'll let him do his thing. So there wasn't a lot of criticism or constructive feedback that Harrison was getting from Ridley. So he was very upset by that and had like no direction. And also working with Sean Young, who plays Rachel in this, she was kind of new and he didn't really vibe with her. There wasn't a lot of chemistry. Which, in my opinion, you can tell in like the love scenes. I feel like there's like no chemistry between them whatsoever.
Yeah, like I feel like this movie, like everything you just said is like pretty on point, because this movie's almost like a study in setting and like ambiance. In a lot of ways, more so than like a study of plot or like writing or like character development. Which is really interesting. Like I kept thinking, I mean, because like there's a lot of layers to this movie. There's a lot of thematic elements to this movie, but like none of them really pertain to the plot. Like, the plot's like pretty straightforward. Like, Rick Deckard has to kill 4 androids. Like, it's pretty straightforward, Yeah. There's not like twists and turns, or like anything like that. I think it's a little bit more conceptual, and like a lot of that's driven by the way things are filmed and the places that the characters are in, and like that kind of stuff, where like the city and the settings kind of create moods that like you're supposed to kind of like interpret as the viewer, and like that adds to the themes of this movie. It's not like I don't want to call it like an art house picture, but like it's pretty close. Like
I know what you mean. And it's funny you say that, because Ridley was like, when he made this movie, he wanted to focus on all of that, like the background, the cool stuff. And he there's a lot of people that dissect the shit out of this movie. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of themes and motifs and stuff like that. And basically Ridley he has said that it's all kind of coincidental that that it has like these crazy themes and motifs and stuff like that. He's like, I wasn't really going for that. I was just going for for it to be cool and atmospheric.
Yeah. I mean, this whole movie is a fucking vibe. Like,
oh yeah.
Like, even if he wasn't being meticulous to that detail, like you can tell everything is set and shot extremely meticulously to create this like sense of like gritty darkness and like decay mixed in with this like crazy sci-fi future. It's like,
it's so cool.
Yeah, I was quickly skimming through some like stuff about this, and like a lot of people credit this as like the birth of like cyberpunk, which is like dead on. Like the feeling of this movie is just so like I don't know, it's kind of like the blueprint for a lot of like dystopian future, like almost like this is what I think of whenever somebody says dystopian future. It's like, oh, like never ending city streets with like neon everywhere and like the like over corporatized kind of like billboarding and like stuff like that, which 2049 also does incredibly well. Especially with Anna de Armas's character, like everywhere, like in different advertisements, is like a really cool like
version of her or whatever, or like reset, like selling. I think the word meticulous sums up the like art direction of this movie. They're watching that documentary, the Dangerous Days documentary. The first scene they shot was Tyrell's office in Tyrell Corp, and the set was completely decorated. They like buffed the tile floor and like made it shiny as hell. And Ridley is about to shoot, and he's like, "Oh, these columns are upside down. We need to flip them upside down. Like they're wrong." And it's pretty interesting, and that like delayed the production. So there was a lot of things like that delayed the production. Was just him being like, "Hey, this isn't right. This is not my vision. This is how I want it done." And I mean, obviously the attention to detail speaks volumes. He wanted everything to be different. He also, it's funny, is he did not want to make another sci-fi movie coming off of Alien. That was like not his agenda. And he was actually going to do the original Dune. Oh,
which is also very...
It's kind of sci-fi, which is funny.
I mean, it's hardcore sci-fi. Like,
and it's weird because he was attached to that, and then he dropped out, and he's like, all right, well, he'll do this. He also was kind of in a dark place in his life because his brother, not Tony Scott, but his other brother, I forget his name, his brother died of cancer at like kind of a young age. So he's in like a really dark place, and that's why he made this movie so dark and atmospheric. Like even the opening shots with the eye and the like oil rigs of like, this is LA, and it's dark and there's all these flames, and the whole setting is so cool because it's like ecologically, like it's like post-ecological disaster.
Yeah,
and
it's
like
grimy
trashy.
And gritty, and like there's no plants, like
there's no animals. There's no animals either, which is crazy.
The owl in Tyrell's
but
like
apparently
office
that's,
or room or whatever. But
apparently
it's a
same as the snake. Like there's the scene where he asks Zara or whatever her name is, the one replicant, where he's like, "Oh, is that a real snake?" And she's like, "You think I'd be working in a place like this if this was a real snake?" Yeah, it's pretty interesting. It's very, like you said, dystopian. Like Earth is slowly dying. It's just so atmospheric, this movie. The visual effects are great. It was nominated for an Oscar for that. I believe it lost to E.T.
Which is kind of funny.
It is funny. It also was nominated for Best Art Direction, which I believe Gandhi won for that in 82/83. Which is also interesting. Like, how did this movie not win?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this movie pushed the boundaries of
set design
more than Gandhi did. But whatever.
Yeah. I mean, I have not seen Gandhi, to be fair.
I saw it a long time ago. We actually watched it in school. Like, it's a good movie.
I must have not been in your class.
It's like 2.5, 3 hours plus long. It's really long.
Richard Attenborough who directed it.
But I mean, it was a good movie.
The director of the director is I'm blanking on the Jurassic Park guy's name.
Hamlin?
Old dude. Is it Hamlin?
Hammond?
Hammond. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hammond. Yeah.
He directed
that. Yeah. He directed Gandhi, which is hilarious.
That's cool.
Yeah. It's this. Just the set design is so cool. It's like what's funny is it's the standard street, like, you see in like TV shows, that one street that always looks the same, and it's like that classic set, Hollywood studio set. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You see those you see that in a lot of Chicago Fire, stuff like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like kind
yeah.
of B level, not A level TV shows,
Or like sitcoms, or like yeah.
That was the set they used, and the reason they shot at night and in rain and with fog is to basically hide all of that. Mm-hmm. And what's funny is, this is supposed to be LA, but it's like the Japanese and like Chinese, I think it's more Japanese, have like taken over in the future, and that's kind of what they think the future looks like, which is very interesting.
It's like hyper urban environment.
Yeah.
Like they say it's like a city of like 108 million people or something like that, which is
crazy.
Like nuts. Like, and like, like there's a lot of like, I don't know if it's like immigration, like into LA, like for whatever reason. But yeah, like it's a lot of like heavy like Japanese influence. Like,
yes.
I mean, at this time, this is like the rise of Japan in like the electronics industry and stuff in the beginning of the 80s, and like they basically took over that industry, throughout the 80s. So like this is kind of a little prolific or prophetic, and prophetic, not prolific, in a lot of ways, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, it was definitely, from what I read, it was inspired heavily by Tokyo and Hong Kong and like their downtown urban cityscapes, which adds to the film noir aspect of it. With, like you said, the neon signs are so cool, and they were all like, in the documentary they talk about the designs on those, which is really cool. Like they did different symbols. Like they didn't want you to read it; they wanted you to just see it and be like, "Oh, that's cool." That was like the whole idea. There's a lot of chiaroscuro lighting is what it's called, where it's almost like you're looking through blinds.
Yeah.
Where it's, the levels of lighting, and they call that like chiaroscuro or chiaroscuro lighting, which is very pronounced in noir movies, Maltese Falcon, stuff like that. You've got the femme fatale, which is Rachel, how she's all dressed and almost like a pinup girl with her hair and everything and her outfits.
Always very out of place looking.
Yes.
And like draws your attention.
Every time I watch this movie, I'm like, hey, it's Finkel/Einhorn from Ace Ventura.
Yeah.
I think about that every time. Yeah, I don't know if I like her acting really in this movie.
She kind of acts like a robot.
Fair.
So, Fair. I don't know. I mean, I think I do agree that her and Harrison Ford's chemistry is not like top notch.
Yeah, I don't like it.
And like, it's kind of like, I mean, so I read the book.
Yeah, I want to hear about that because I have not read it.
Yeah, the book is called "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep" by Philip K. Dick. Philip K. Dick is a pretty renowned sci-fi writer. If you haven't read the book, it's totally worth it. It's very short and like an easy read. It's very good. The movie and the book have almost nothing to do with each other besides like character names and like the general plot. But like there's a lot of similarity between like the interactions between Deckard and Rachel, or like they're like oddly not that like they don't interact well with each other, but end up like falling in love, which is like kind of weird. But also is kind of a trope of femme fatale noir filmmaking.
Definitely.
Where like these, oil and water kind of end up together. and that's usually what causes the downfall of the hero in most, noir films.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, I don't mind it. I kind of look at particularly in the movie, their romance is very much a like subplot, and isn't like super important to the overall narrative.
Yeah, because Hampton Fancher was a fan of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. He wrote it, and then they hired David Webb Peoples to come in and basically redo a lot of it and add a lot of stuff to it. So I think that's where it kind of deviates from the book, is when Peoples came in on board as a rewriter. So there's actually, I kind of want to go back to like the signs and stuff in the city. There's a lot of product placement, but there's also a lot of folklore amongst the influence. Like there's basically a tale of the Blade Runner curse, that all these brands that are kind of advertised in the movie have all gone out of business. So, and they were market leaders at the time, apparently. Like RCA, for example. GE. Atari. There's like Pan Am. There's a whole bunch of other. There's a whole paragraph on it that I have here, but I don't really feel like reading it. But like a lot of these, a lot of these companies have gone out of business. GE's still in business. I think I was reading it
not
wrong.
The global powerhouse that they were in, like the 80s and 90s.
Yeah. Pretty interesting though, and it's also interesting that there's only 90 visual effects shot in the entire movie. That's it. Again, it's like miniatures and like the set designs all like just awesome.
They add
like
so
paintings.
much. So
yeah, I mean, it's so well done, and like all the props. Again, Ridley Scott was so meticulous about props, where he was like, "Hey, I want like 100 different pens, and I want to pick the right one. 100 different like thermos coolers, and like his gun. Everything is so unique and so it fits so well with part of this world. Like it still seems like a lot of the stuff still seems futuristic to me, which is so cool, especially 42 years later, which is pretty wild.
His gun is so cool.
Yeah.
It's like it is kind of like one of those like cyberpunk kind of things where it like kind of looks like a revolver, but it's got like this big like front end, and like it's got like I want like under the barrel, it looks like there's like lights on it and stuff. So it looks like it's like electronic, and like it's just super cool. Like really cool attention to detail. Yeah.
Like the Voight comp test, that little thing with the like almost like the air like respirator is pretty cool.
Like the eyeball sensor thing, like that folds up by itself, is pretty cool. And like it still holds up. Again, that's why we love practical effects. It's just they hold up so well. I mean the glowing eyes is pretty cool. I think that whole technique is really cool. Apparently, because that's like a big part of who's a replicant and who's not, is what with the shining eyes. That technique was invented by Fritz Lang and his cinematographer Eugene Shufton, if I'm pronouncing that right, known as the Shuftian process. Light is bounced into the actor's eyes with a like half piece of mirrored glass mounted at a 45-degree angle to the camera,
and it like reflects the light back into their eyes, which is so cool. And it's such a cool like thing. And I feel like not a lot of, maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like not a lot of like films have that like glow to people's eyes.
It's almost like red eye, you know, in like
Yeah.
camera like
Yeah.
photos, like real like photos. Like usually that's like undesirable, so you like don't want that, you know. But like it's I do love how subtle it is in this. Like if you're not really paying attention, you won't notice it. Or you'll brush it off as just like part of the filmmaking, you know. Which I was actually waiting for my wife to mention it, and she never brought it up through the entire movie.
Was this the first time she'd seen it?
Yeah. So
oh wow!
I need to ask her again if she noticed it or not.
Did she like it?
I think she thought it was okay. She was on her phone a lot of the time, so yeah.
Yeah,
This is a hard movie for millennials to watch, though.
It really is. One of my buddies rates this movie kind of low and doesn't like it that much. It is kind of a hard movie to get into, but if you just respect the process of it and know like what went into it and just like the lore of it, that's what makes it so awesome. Yeah. And again, the soundtrack, just everything about it's so cool. I think a lot of people think that it's supposed to be an action movie because it's got Harrison Ford in it. Again, coming off of Indiana Jones and Star Wars. Like, yeah. They want to see him kick ass. And in this movie, he gets his ass kicked so much.
Yeah, in this movie. He is severely at a disadvantage throughout the entire movie. Which, is not typical for him in a role. And that was one of the parts of this movie that I actually did forget about, was how much he gets fucking whooped. So like,
dude, he gets his ass
like, oh jeez, like holy shit.
Yeah.
I mean, like the first, I can't remember the first or the other, not Roy, but the other guy replicant, Leon, like. Deckard pulls his gun on him and he just bats it out of his hand and it goes flying.
And then,
it's like,
slaps him.
Shit. Yeah.
So that's Byron James, who was in Tango and Cash. He is in a whole bunch of movies, a whole bunch of 80s movies that we've watched.
Yeah, he's another 80s staple.
Yeah. I like him. He's funny. I'm trying to think what else he's been in that we've watched. I mean, you've also got M. Emmett Walsh, who we just watched in Blood Simple. He's the captain.
Yes. Yep.
Bryant. You've got James Hong, who is in, I believe, Big Trouble in Little China. Yeah, he's in Big Trouble in Little China from John Carpenter, which you said you've never seen that, right?
I have not.
All right, that's on the list.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're definitely watching that. Let me see. Blade Runner.
Edward James Olmos.
Yep, he's good. I mean, the cast is great. Yeah, it's just... Yeah, it's so good. So another kind of attention to detail with the lighting is all the... Again, it kind of goes back to where I was talking about the chiaroscuro lighting with the like blinds or like the wood slats where the light's coming through. This level of detail and meticulousness he had, and why he wanted it is super cool. Because a lot of his crew was asking, like, why are there like lights shining through these windows so high up? It makes no sense. And so he always, like, Ridley Scott always had an explanation for all the things he did on this movie. And so, for example, in the Bradbury building, where J.F. Sebastian is in Pris in his apartment that's kind of high up, where you see him go high up, it's like, why are there lights there? And Ridley Scott's response was, do you want to know exactly why? This is why I logically have lights here. Because we have air traffic in the city. And because we have tall buildings, very tall buildings, there's some kind of governing systems that, let's say, don't allow a car to crash. All these buildings have beacons on them, and they spin onto the building opposite side. So it's annoying to have to describe and justify these things when he knows on film it's going to look beautiful. And he's going to put a sound to it. A sound for light. And they're like, a sound for light? That doesn't make sense. But it does. Like, it makes total sense why you'd have those there for the traffic, the air traffic.
Right.
And that's so cool.
Yeah, and like it in this version of the future, like the buildings are also all like skyscrapers.
Yeah.
So like you have like canyons of like city streets rather than like, you know, a normal city street in LA, which is pretty flat, you know, overall. So yeah, like there would be light like everywhere all the time. So yeah, I mean it's a cool thought, you know, to like include that type of detail. And it just looks awesome. But
It does. It does. Also, the cars, the spinners, are so cool. And in the documentary, they go over the guy who was designing the cars built like 25 or 30 of them, and they were all pretty like functioning. And like the shot of the cop car spinner that goes and gets hoisted into the air is awesome. I mean, you can kind of see a wire pulling it up, but it's fine. It's the 80s.
Yeah.
We'll accept it.
like
all the cars are cool.
They move so smooth and stuff too. Like it's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And I like how they like exhaust when they like move, when they like take off or whatever too, because like it adds to that like dusty, foggy, grimy kind of atmosphere, you know.
Yeah.
Like these things
the
aren't
pollution.
clean and like super like refined and stuff. It's just like pukes out like steam as it like takes off, you know. It's pretty cool.
Very cool. Very cool. I want to also talk about, and I'm sure you appreciate this, the Deckard's apartment, where it's very Frank Lloyd Wright inspired, and like the bricks.
I think it
or
wasn't
like not bricks,
actually
but
filmed in the Frank Lloyd Wright house in LA.
that's a good question. I think they just were very inspired by it and made it that way.
I couldn't remember if they actually filmed in there or if it was kind of just copied.
I think it was copied from what I saw.
Yeah, if anybody doesn't know what I'm talking about, there's a house that Frank Lloyd Wright did in LA that's kind of up in the hills, and it's designed almost like a Mayan temple, and it has these big cube like concrete blocks that with these like symbols on it, and the whole house is stacks of like these things to make it look like you know, like Mayan kind of architecture, and they're all throughout the house. Like the walls are like built with these blocks too and stuff, but then he incorporates a lot of the like like woods and things like that for like the railings, and like there's lots of glass, and like the house is incredible. Like Google it and take a look at it, and then like think about what Deckard's apartment looks like, and it's like, oh yeah, okay, like totally makes sense.
Yeah.
But like Frank Lloyd Wright has always kind of had like a little touch of like Japanese like influence too, which is also like very fitting of this movie, where like he kind of takes cues of like the very long cantilevers of it, like his roofs, that it's very like a Japanese kind of style, maybe not intentionally the same, but it evokes that kind of architecture too. So yeah, I love the way his apartment's designed in this.
So
it's
cool.
so awesome.
Yeah. And David Webb Peoples, the second writer on the movie, he went and visited that set. He was on the set during the apartment scene, and he was blown away by it. he thought it was so like lived in, and the furniture was so perfect, and it just was so cool. And I just imagine like us going to that set and how cool that would be. Like you're part of history there because of that movie. Like that's so cool. Yeah, it's awesome. Then you get to what do you think of the replicants? Like Roy Batty and all them. What do you think about all them?
Yeah, so this is another interesting note of difference between the book and the movie. In the movie, they're called replicants. In the book, they're called androids. And kind of referred to in like a derogatory way as Andes. And like the way people talk about androids in the book is like very like people are afraid of them in the book, and also kind of treat them like a subclass. Like they're kind of there to be like servants or like workers, and like, you know, they're
used as slaves.
Right. Yes. Yeah, they're slave labor primarily in the colonies, which are like the Moon and Mars and
off-world colonies.
Off-world, yeah.
Yeah, they have that description in the beginning of the movie too.
Yeah. Roy Beatty, who's like the leader, is pretty similar between the book and the movie. He's kind of like an alpha, and like he's also kind of losing it. In the book, they mention that androids have a lifespan. Though Roy's not like super close to the end of his lifespan in the book the way he is in the movie. But he's kind of detached because he's been on the run, and like is kind of in like a caged animal kind of situation where he's like backed into a corner where Deckard's coming for him. And we see that in the movie, I think pretty clearly in the final like encounter with Deckard.
Yeah, from what I read is technically the movie takes place over a few months, through like Deckard's detective, him finding clues and stuff like that. It takes place over months, so because I think the movie starts in like November and ends in January, and that's like 4 years after Beatty's incept date was like January of 2016. So that's the 4 years. That's why he's kind of dying at the end. It's also interesting that there's, like I said, there's like no daylight in this entire movie.
Yeah.
It's interesting with the passage of time, but it makes sense. It like all doesn't happen in one day.
Well, the book takes place in like less than 48 hours.
Oh, wow.
Which is super interesting.
Interesting.
And like the whole point of the speed of the book is that they briefly mention this, I think, but they don't spend like almost like nearly anything like in terms of time on it. But Deckard's taking the case on from another bounty hunter that was basically injured by Roy Beatty, and he managed to kill 2 of the 6 androids that escaped from the Mars colony led by Roy, and Deckard's got to go clean them up, basically is the premise of the book. And Deckard's basically already on the clock because he's like, we got to kill all these fuckers in like 24 hours or they're gone. Like, so, and like, there's a lot more focus on the money in the book because he is a bounty hunter. So he's like extremely motivated by the amount of money he'll make by killing 4 androids in one day. Because usually it's like 1 android per month, if that. So that's another interesting difference between the book and the movie.
My one last score. I kill these androids and I'm done. I'm out of this miserable business forever.
That's literally like the premise of the book. And like his motivation is, I'm going to make this money. Then me and my wife, which he's married in the book, which is also interesting. But then he's like, we're getting the fuck off of Earth. Because like he doesn't want to be there anymore. And he's kind of bought into the dream of the perfect off-world colonies, in quotes, because we don't really know what they're like. But
we need to make a movie that's like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should do that.
But I mean, it's a like the movie and the book handle very different aspects of the potential themes that this narrative like puts out. Like in a lot of ways they're like almost opposing in the way that like they handle things.
Interesting.
Like spoilers for anybody that really wants to read the book, but like the book focuses a lot more on Deckard's mental state as he continues retiring these androids, and like he starts to feel guilty and like remorseful, like with more and more so with each one that he retires. Where like there's no guilt whatsoever in the movie, and like Harrison Ford like doesn't show any kind of remorse for killing these androids, and like most of the time he's getting his ass kicked by them pretty hard before he ends up killing them, so that's fair. Or in the book, Deckard is like a peak bounty hunter, and he just blows these guys away like it's nothing. So it's really interesting how like the two versions of the story kind of handle the same material.
Yeah, what's funny is Deckard in the movie only kills one replicant. He only kills Zara or whatever her name is.
He kills 2. He kills Pris.
Oh yeah, he kills Pris. Excuse me, kills 2. Yeah. But he doesn't kill Beatty because Beatty expires, and he doesn't kill Leon. Leon gets shot by Rachel.
Yeah.
Pretty interesting. Rutger Hauer, I think, does an awesome job as Beatty. I think he's so good in this movie. I think he is the best actor in the movie, to be honest.
Yeah, he's really good.
Apparently, he came up with a lot of the characterization for Roy, and he also, like the ending scene where he gives that speech, kind of memories will be like lost like tears in the rain. He basically improvised that line, and there was a huge monologue, and he cut a lot of the dialogue out, and on set he was improvising it and gave that line, and apparently people were like moved to tears when they watched it, which is pretty funny. But it's pretty interesting because in real life Rutger Hauer passed away in 2019, the same year as his character, basically. So pretty interesting. So I want to get into the ending. Specifically, let's start with, do you think Deckard is a replicant or not? Because that's a very controversial topic for this movie.
Yeah, I mean, the damning evidence is that his eyes,
I know,
are the same as the androids. There's one, I think it's only one shot where he's standing behind Rachel and he's kind of out of focus, and you can see his eyes like light up.
It's in his apartment.
Yeah. Now, if he was actually a replicant, I feel like he wouldn't get the shit kicked out of him like every single
I
time he
know.
encounters an android, unless he's an inferior model. But I don't know.
But if anything, I feel like he'd be a more advanced model because he has emotion basically and falls in love with Rachel.
Yeah, so he actually expresses like a lot of emotion, which the androids don't really. Like they can kind of fake it, but like you see in the opening part of the movie when Leon is getting the test done, he's like glitching out like through most of it, kind of, because they can't like process it correctly. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's one of those things where like, if he didn't have the eye, that shot with the eyes, I would say he's absolutely not. But like, it's kind of, I don't know.
The only other evidence, I mean, I'm sure there's a little bit more, but the evidence that I question is that he has the dream about the unicorn. And Gaff, who's played by Edward James Olmos, gives him that origami. He's like always making origami figures, and he gives him that unicorn at the end.
Yeah.
It's like, did Gaff know that he is a replicant? And there's also a line that he says, "Oh, you've done a man's job." Where it's like, oh, interesting. There's a couple instances like that. Ridley Scott is okay with either interpretation of him being a replicant or not, but he believes the answer is yes, he is a replicant. Harrison Ford says no. He says the expression on Deckard's face, noticing the origami unicorn outside his apartment, is a confirmation. So, yeah. Which they don't answer it in 2049 if he's a replicant or not.
No.
But my interpretation
I will say 2049 has Kay, who is played by Ryan Gosling, is an android and a Blade Runner.
Yeah.
So that might lend more credence to the theory that all Blade Runners are androids, possibly.
Fair point.
But, I mean, that's not necessarily... I mean, that's 30 years in the future, so...
Yeah.
Things could have changed, but...
Because Rachel is... so these, Roy and Leon and Zora and Pris, they're all Nexus 6 models.
Yeah.
And it's confirmed in Blade Runner 2049 that Rachel was a Nexus 7 model. She was like a prototype that Tyrell created. And, she was given kind of a particular, a longer lifespan than 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
But it's up to debate because it's, you've got... I mean, he cracked it probably, but the whole mission of these Nexus 6 models, these androids, these replicants, Roy and Leon and all of them, their whole mission is to get more life. That's like that's their whole, like, that's what's driving them. That's their motivations. And they go to Tyrell and ask him, like, hey, have you tried this? Have you tried this? Like, because they're as smart as they're as smart as their makers, which the makers were like the smartest engineers. It's kind of notated in the beginning of the movie. Do you think Tyrell's lying when he says, I don't know, like, we've tried these enzyme proteins and blah, blah, blah? And it's like, do you think he's lying and gave unlimited life to, or a specific longer lifespan to Rachel?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. If Rachel is a Nexus 7 with a modified lifespan, then he has to be lying to Roy.
Yeah.
If that's less like solid and it's a little more ambiguous, then he might be telling the truth. I like to think that he's telling the truth.
Interesting.
And that
Okay.
like Roy kind of just takes out his frustration on him, like without really like an unwarranted, aggression for something that can't be overcome. It lends a little bit more to Roy's like deteriorating state of mind throughout the movie, I think.
Yeah. Because there's a deleted scene, or it's deleted from the final cut and stuff. Apparently, in the theatrical version, Tyrell says that she was created without an expiration date.
Oh, really?
Pretty interesting. But also, I mean, that's where these questions and like plot holes and stuff come about, where you get Harrison Ford in 2049 and he's, obviously older, because that's what happens in life. You get older. It's like, do these, all their skin is natural. It's like, it's very hard to tell them apart.
Mm-hmm.
As they get older. Do their bodies get older? I mean, yes, that makes sense. But pretty interesting. All these replicants have a thematic animal to them. Animals is kind of a theme of this movie, where it's like animals are very rare, like we talked about in the beginning of this episode. They are like extinct on Earth, and every like character has a thematic animal. You've got Leon with the tortoise on its back. You've got Rachel with the owl in Tyrell's office. Mm-hmm. You've got Zora with the snake. You've got Roy Batty with the wolf, and he's howling at the end in the fight scene. And then you've got Rick Deckard with the unicorn. So they all have an animal, and that also lends credence to him being a replicant.
Yeah, and like the animal thing is interesting because, again, in the book, animals are like a super important part of the narrative, and like they are like almost all animals are near extinct, and some are completely extinct, and people pay like house kind of prices to own like really mundane animals like squirrels and raccoons and like stuff like that. And like in one of the scenes in the book, Deckard goes to which it's not called Tyrell in the book, it's called Rosen, the company that creates Rachel. But he goes to the Rosen Corporation, and on their roof they have a bunch of animal cages, and Deckard sees a raccoon. He's like, that's not possible, that has to be an electric raccoon, and like looks up. He always carries this little book that's called Sydney's that has all the latest prices on every animal, and for raccoons it says like NA because it's extinct. But Rachel like tells him that like, no, it's a real raccoon, like we know how to get them, like
interesting.
So like it's like this like super luxury. And like one of the key points in the movie, or in the book, is that Deckard has a fake sheep that's an electric, sheep.
That's where the title comes from.
Where the title kind of comes from. But he ends up spending his bounty money to buy a goat, a real goat, and like is like over the moon about the fact that he like bought this goat. So like it's kind of like
interesting.
Yeah, it's weird, but I think it's a cool detail that they brought into the movie.
Yeah, is
that like all the animals are basically fake because like they don't exist, anymore. It's cool. I do think that like animal motif for all the characters is like a nice like visualization for like each character too, and like a cool way to kind of represent the characters like symbolically. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, this movie asks a whole bunch of questions like what it's meant to be human, what's it meant to be, subhuman or not superior and like its race and all that. And, is it emotion? Is emotion what makes us human? And, these androids can't have emotion, and that's why they aren't considered human. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's interesting. There's a lot of questions that this movie poses, which again I don't think was entirely intentional, but it's cool that it is, and I like when that happens, when filmmakers are like, oh yeah, I guess it works out that way.
Yeah. I mean, like that's one of the things that I do wish the movie had that the book has is Pris in the book is actually the same model as Rachel, so they look like they have the same face.
Interesting.
Even though like their hair is different and like but like that's like when Deckard has to confront Pris, he knows that she's going to look like Rachel, and he's already kind of fallen for Rachel. So he like has this like internal debate of like, can I kill Rachel, basically.
Interesting.
Yeah, which is like that might have made the movie a little bit like more philosophical.
Yeah.
But yeah,
well,
it's a cool part of the
2049.
book. Yes.
Almost.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, and like not I mean the movie's
not in that way,
great,
but yeah.
how it is, and like I said, the movie doesn't deal with Deckard's like internal processing of like the androids,
Mm-hmm.
like he doesn't seem to care one way or another of like what happens to the androids. Like he's just doing his job, which is kind of fitting for a film noir movie. Like he's kind of like a morally gray character. Like
and that's why it's hard to say like he is a replicant.
Yeah, right.
But when I first watched it when I was young in my teens, I stacked it up to he was just another model like Rachel, where he's more advanced and he's kind of a prototype. But I don't know. I don't want him to be a replicant.
Same. In the book, he definitively is not a replicant.
Yeah.
So I don't want him to be a replicant in the movie. I'd like for him to be human. So I think it just makes it better that he's a human in like a weird way.
Yeah. Let us know what you guys think, if you think he's a replicant or not. I love this movie. I think it's great. It's very underrated. It's like I said, it's a little misunderstood. But I think that's what makes it great. The set design, you could watch this movie and have a masterclass in set design. Overall, it's great. I'm going to watch the sequel probably this weekend or next week, and I can't wait. I thoroughly enjoy this movie, and I'm glad we got to talk about it. Also, check out the documentary Dangerous Days. It's on the Blu-ray if you have it, or the movie if you own it. It's really good. Anything else you want to add, Jake?
No, I think you nailed it. This movie is kind of underappreciated. So I'm glad if everybody watched it that's listening. Hopefully you like it as much as we did, because there's so much to like about this movie. Like you don't have to like every aspect of it, but like there's just some really absolutely killer elements to this movie. I hope everybody got something out of watching it, because you should.
What are we gonna hit next month? And we're gonna do Carpenter's Halloween. So we're gonna do all horror movies from John Carpenter from the 80s, of course. So I'm looking forward to that, and we'll get into spooky season, and we've got our whole schedule lined up for the rest of the year, and we've got some fun stuff coming that I'm very much looking forward to. So, we thank you guys for listening. Again, thanks for everyone getting us to 1,000 downloads and views and listeners. We appreciate that. And again, like Jeff Young, thank you for giving us that shout out and that recommendation. If you guys have other recommendations, let us know.
Yeah. And we mentioned it earlier. Next week is going to be The Thing, and we're both pumped for that because
another 82 movie.
We love that movie.
Yeah, I can't wait to watch it. All right, guys. Well, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Yep. See ya.